Okay guys, we're going to take notes on part 2, Sandy Shores. It's all about some bivalves and some sea turtles. Make sure you went and took attendance first, and if you didn't, go do that now and then come back to the notes. Okay, bivalves. They are a mollusk, quite like the mollusk we learned about in the last chapter. So, label your notes Sandy Shores Part 2 nice and ginormous across the top of your paper. You're doing it handwritten either on a piece of paper and you're taking pictures of it and submitting to Schoology, or you are writing them on Notability and submitting them to Schoology. But either way, they are handwritten notes that you have turned into Schoology for me to see. Your own handwriting. Okay, so now, the next 3 slides you actually don't have to write again because you already wrote them down in the last chapter. I'm just refreshing your memory about mollusks. So, mollusks are in the domain Eukarya because their cells are eukaryotes, meaning they have a nucleus. They're in the kingdom Animalia because they are multicellular and they're heterotrophs. They have to eat. And they're in the phylum Mollusca. Now recall that Mollusca is a soft-bodied invertebrate that has a protective mantle that does, or sometimes doesn't, secrete a hard calcium carbonate shell. For the ones that don't, think about the squid and the octopus, okay? Now, this slide you already have in the last chapter too, so you don't have to rewrite it. I'm just refreshing your memory. All right, so all of our mollusks have a muscular foot used for locomotion. They have a mantle that secretes the protective shell, and they have a visceral mass, which is the part of the body, like our rib cage, that contains our internal organs. Okay, so now this you do have to write. Class bivalva, bi meaning 2, valves, okay? 2 shells, okay? So we're gonna have our mussels, our clams, our oysters, and our scallops. And almost all of these are sessile filter feeders. Now what does sessile mean? Sessile means they are stationary. So usually they don't move around and they're just filter feeders. So they don't have the head or the radula like the snail. Okay, so yeah, you gotta learn more parts of a shell. Oh no, Miss Madigan. Okay, now in the gastropods in the last unit, you had to learn that the oldest part was the apex. This time, it is the umbo, okay? So the very first thing that it made when it was an itty bitty little clam was that part of its shell, and it's called the umbo. Now, if they're 2 shells, how are they held together? There's a little hinge ligament that you can see right here that holds them together, and when it contracts, the clam closes. It's kind of awesome. All right, now they also have these things called incurrents and excurrents where the water goes in and out, okay? And this is what it looks like when it's on the sea floor. Those are the incurrents and excurrents. Now, that's because it's in the water, okay, and it's open and it's in the process of filter feeding. Normally, you guys don't get to see them when they're all open. All right, so hint, hint, wink, wink, star, underline. An example of a quiz question might be, what are the incurrent and excurrent siphons used to do? And so it's pumping water through the organism first for them to breathe. So they're having some type of gas exchange. It's an animal, so they're doing cellular respiration. So they also use that water to pump through to feed. And if they need to, if they have to escape from a predator, it can be used as a type of jet propulsion where they can shoot water out the excurrent to make themselves move. All right, now also bivalves can move by extending their muscular foot between their shells, and scallops can swim by clapping their shells together. All right, so they have the open circulatory system, they breathe through gills, and they are filter feeders, just like you can see where the water comes in through the incurrent, goes through the gills, and then back out the excurrent. And it's taking out sand and debris, and it's also taking out food up here. It's kind of amazing. It's quite economical. All right, scallops are kind of freaky. I mean, they have like rows of eyes and they're blue. Bet you didn't know that when you were eating them? I see you. Each has an eye that has a cornea, a lens, and a retina, and a pigmented layer, kind of like our eyes. Cray cray. Okay, so the invasive species that are bivalves that affect the United States are the zebra mussels. And you need to remember that invasive species can be plants or animals or even pathogens that are non-native to our ecosystem, and their introduction into our ecosystem causes or may cause harm. So there's shipworms that burrow through wood, including docks and ships. We've got our terrestrial snails and slugs that damage our garden plants. But the biggest mollusk from the ocean that is an invasive species in the United States is the zebra mussel. And we accidentally introduced it into the Great Lakes through ballast water. And you remember that the ballast water is the water that comes from a ship from overseas. And it has made its way from the Great Lakes all throughout the rivers. It is a really, really big problem. You can see that it is filling up these pipes here. They have to scrape it off. This is not sand on the beach. Those are all zebra mussels. All right, so now sea turtles. Sea turtles are some of the most mysterious yet enduring animals on Earth. Okay, now sea turtles are reptiles. They're covered with protective scales. They breathe air into a set of lungs, so no gills, and they reproduce by laying amniotic eggs. Okay, and these are eggs that are kind of squishy because mommy has to drop the eggs into a hole that she dug about a couple feet deep. And so they have to be able to squish and not break, and they have to be able to avoid dehydration. Now, sea turtles have evolved from other turtles, okay? So sea turtles came from one of these two types. So they have the two main types of sea turtles. You have the modern side-neck turtles that are only found in the southern hemisphere, and usually we have never ever seen one of these. It's super creepy. They don't tuck their head in straight back. They just squish it over to the side. It's weird to me to look at, but okay. And then the other one are the archneck, which are the dominant type of turtles that do retreat their heads back into their shell, like the ones I think we're pretty familiar with. But the one freaky thing about sea turtles is that they can't put their head inside their shell. Like, not at all. Alright, so when did the sea turtles first start to evolve? We think about 65 million years ago, and they were about 13 feet long. Our fossil records indicate that there were other types of sea turtles, including ones that are still around today. The green sea turtle and the loggerhead sea turtle. But no matter what, even though they have evolved later than our primitive turtles, they still cannot retract their head or their arms into their shells. So, hint, hint, wink, wink, star underline. An example of a test question might be, what is one thing that sea turtles cannot do that our land, our box, or aquatic and tortoises can do? And you would say they can't retract their head or their limbs into their shell for protection. All right, so while the ancestors of our modern sea turtles have gone extinct, there are 7 species of sea turtles that still remain around today. All right, a lot of things are still in common with organisms that were around back then. Their migratory routes, their nesting habitats and locations, their feeding techniques, their diets, all of those physical character traits that distinguish them from one species to the next. Those are all still around. So let's talk about some of these things. Okay. Sea turtles have a shell that varies in color. It can be black all the way to yellow. Now this top shell is called a carapace, and it is divided into little sections called scutes. Now, on their belly portion, okay, the ventral surface is a shell covering called a plastron. So we have a carapace with scutes and a plastron. Now, there's all sorts of names for these crazy scutes, and there's even prefrontal scutes, okay? They're all got different, and you're going to learn more about them when we do... Holly! Sorry about that, my dog's barking. When we do the Sea Turtle AA next week. Now, everything is divided into a massive amount of different types of scutes. I'm not making you learn any of those. I just want you to know that there is a carapace with scutes and a plastron with scutes. Okay? Now, threats to sea turtles. Let's talk about the natural ones first. The raccoons love to eat them. Predators like birds when they're on land, crabs when they're on land. When the little hatchlings first get into the water, the fish are going to eat them because they're so tiny. And then when they're adults, sharks and killer whales are their predators. But there's a lot of human threats too. We alter the beaches and the shorelines because of coastal development. We have all sorts of artificial lighting because of coastal development. We can drive on the beach and squish their nests and therefore prevent procreation. They get entangled in our fishing gear quite frequently. Sometimes they get hit by boats. They are edible, so there are many laws protecting them, but so then it's called poaching when people try and get them. And then of course the marine debris of our plastics and our balloons. Okay, so some of the reasons people poach them is not just for their meat, which might serve a whole community for a source of time, but apparently their eggs are quite tasty too. The hawksbill sea turtle is an endangered species mostly because of its really pretty shell, and they make all sorts of jewelry out of it. So they are actually listed as critically endangered. Marine pollution has also been one of the things that has really hurt our sea turtles. So new research suggests that the new disease that is hurting our sea turtles is from our pollution, and those tumors can take over their whole body. So oil spills, urban runoff from chemical fertilizers, and our petroleum all contribute to water pollution. So you might have heard about some ordinances about lighting, like when I was talking about your artificial lighting on the beach, like all of these houses, all these street lamps and everything. The sea turtle's instinct is to go towards the light. Well, if the light on land is brighter than the moonlight over the water, which is when they usually hatch at night, they crawl the wrong way. So when they did make the rules to turn the lights off and have ordinance on which way the light can project during sea turtle nesting season or hatching season, you can see that almost all of them with the lights on crawled towards the road. But when the lights were off, they almost all went towards the ocean. Okay, now when I'm talking about pollution, I want you to look at this plastic bag. Okay, one of these jars contains a jellyfish and the other one contains a plastic bag. If you're a sea turtle, do they look all that different to you? Okay, and it's not just our sea turtles. I know I've been pounding this all year, but our pollution is killing all sorts of animals. Let's try and be respectful human beings on our planet. We have a responsibility to take care of it. All right, so what are we trying to do to help? Like I said, there are lighting ordinances that make sure that the sea turtles get to dig the dark. There are habitat conservation plans, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. Okay, and there are these turtle excluder devices from some major companies where the turtle will hit the net and be able to pop out because he's heavy enough where the fish would not. There are volunteer sea turtle patrol programs that you can actually be a part of over at Cape Canaveral. I've done it a couple of times. Sometimes you get lucky and you hit the jackpot and you're there the night that they hatch and you can help them get into the ocean without getting eaten by predators. And other times you're just standing there watching a pile of sand. But no matter what, that Sea Turtle Patrol program saves turtles' lives and is totally worth doing. We're also learning all sorts of stuff about satellite tagging from our sea turtles because they will go back to the beach they're born at and we have no idea how they know. More about that later. Now, how do you tell the difference between a male sea turtle and a female sea turtle? They're about exactly the same size. The one thing that is very different is their tails. If it is a big, long tail, it's a boy. And yes, it's used for exactly what you think it's used for. Okay, more on that later. All right, sea turtles can live in salt water, and they don't need a freshwater source. They can just drink the salt water right from there. Now, they excrete salt from a gland near their eye. So when they're on land laying their nest, they actually look like they're crying. And for a while, people thought it must have been extraordinarily painful for them to lay these nests. But no, it's just salt excretion. All right, so when the sea turtle comes on shore to make a nest, okay, the sex of the sea turtle is determined by temperature. So hot chicks, cool dudes. If it's a warm nest, it's female. If it's a cool nest, it's male. The problem is with climate change and the temperatures getting hotter, we're getting far, far more females than we are males. There's actually some programs out there where they collect some of the eggs from the nest and they incubate them in a cool temperature, and then right before their time to hatch, they go bury them so that when they hatch from the beach, so they know how to come back to it, but they're dudes, okay? If you want an entertaining video, there is the link to it. All right, so they do lay a nest kind of like birds, okay? They'll crawl up to the beach, dig a hole with their back limbs, their flippers, and then they will deposit the eggs. Now, each individual sea turtle, now unless you're there watching them bury the nest, how do we know what kind of sea turtle it is? We can tell by their tracks. They all have unique turtle tracks, okay? So the way they walk on the beach and leave their little tracks in the sand, like little paw prints, actually tells us which kind of sea turtle it is. That's pretty cool. Sometimes, so these are successful crawls where they came up, they laid a nest. You can see there's probably a nest like right here. Okay, and then they went back to the beach. Now here's one that made like, whoop, nope, not today. Maybe there's too much competition or something, but they made a little U-turn and about face and went right back into the water. So that is called a false crawl, and it is a non-nesting crawl. All right, so that nest has an egg chamber, and it's been excavated by the rear flippers of the sea turtle, and she deposits a clutch of eggs. Remember I said they were amniotic eggs, and when they hit, they have to be a little squishy, okay? Just like I said before, we know that they navigate. They're not winning any Mom of the Year awards. Mom doesn't stick around. Dad doesn't stick around. It's not like Finding Nemo. Boo. Okay? But they will orient themselves to the brightest light, and that's where they go. And we have no idea how they come back to the same beach. We just don't know. For millions of years, it's something that's passed from mother to child, mother to child. And some people say it's a magnetic compass, but I don't know. But they do migrate all over the world's oceans to find food, to find mates, and to go to beaches to nest on. All right, that's it. That's the end of part 2. You are going to learn all sorts of stuff about the 7 species of sea turtles that currently exist in our world's oceans. All you have to do next week is to do the AA on the sea turtles and then part 3 notes. Okay? So, that's it. That's part 2 notes, bivalves, and the introduction to sea turtles. There's so much more about it, but I want to let you have some fun digging around in there and getting your hands dirty and learning about the sea turtles that can be found all over our world. All right? Have a good day, and I will see you next week. Virtually, of course. All right.